So in a previous video, I talked all about how we get energy out of our food in cellular respiration. Today I'm going to talk about how that food got made in the first place. Specifically, I'm going to be talking about photosynthesis. So if we just look at the word, we can kind of break down what's going on. So photo, for light, and synthesis is build. And photosynthesis is using light to build molecules. This is really important. This is the basis of all of our food chains. So the energy comes from the sun, is converted into a form we can use by plants, and then we either eat the plants or we eat something that eats the plants, or eat something that eats the something that eats the plants. But this whole conversion from light energy into organic matter or chemical energy occurs during photosynthesis, and so it's super important for life as we know it to exist. So let's break down the kind of overall what's going on. First, you have carbon dioxide, or CO2, plus water, which is H2O. Now you need light. GHT, sorry, my handwriting is not great today. And you're going to use those to build glucose, which is C6H12O6, and oxygen. Now if I want to balance that, I'm going to put those 6's in there. Now, this may look a little bit familiar. If we go to our cellular respiration, you may notice something. So if I look at these, my reactants for photosynthesis, so the things on this side, are the same as my products over here, with a big difference being the form of energy. And then here, my products from photosynthesis are the same as the reactants for cellular respiration. So these are kind of like inverse of each other. So again, just to kind of review that vocabulary too, these are your reactants, and these are the products. So I'm just going to summarize kind of what's going on, big picture. So you have the sun, which is where the light is coming from. Now, this reaction occurs in producers. So those are plants, and also some bacteria and some protists can do photosynthesis. And specifically, it occurs inside of the chloroplast. So we're dealing with a chloroplast, CHLOROPLAST. And inside of that chloroplast, you have some different structures. So you have something called the grana, and then you have the watery part that is the stroma. Now, inside of the grana, you have a pigment called chlorophyll. So it's that green pigment. So that pigment is called chlorophyll. And that is actually what's going to interact with the light in photosynthesis. So let's take a look at what's going on, what processes are occurring here. So the first stage is what we call the light reactions, or light-dependent reaction. And it occurs in the grana. It requires light, so the light comes in. It strikes the chlorophyll, and some electrons get excited. This step also requires water, so this is where the water comes in. The water, the light, a bunch of chemical reactions. Oxygen is produced as a byproduct. But you also have some conversions of energy going on. So you have ADP, remember that's kind of like your used up ATP, and something called NAD+, which is kind of an empty electron carrier. These guys come in and these reactions occur and they pick up electrons and energy. And so they leave with their haul of energy. So they have some ATP and you have that NADPH. Again, it's just carrying some energy. And it brings it to something called the Kelvin cycle, or the light independent reactions. So Kelvin cycle. And this occurs in the stroma. And this is where your carbon dioxide comes in. So the CO2 comes in, it combines with the energy and the electrons and the hydrogen, and you end up with glucose, or some sort of sugar. Now this is important because glucose is more stable than ATP, because you might be thinking like, well, you made some ATP, why not just use that? Well, the ATP doesn't stick around for very long, it's not really stable, so you store it in glucose, and then you can always use cellular respiration to get it back out again. So just a quick overview of what's going on in each of those reactions. You've got your light reactions. And this is what I call like your energy converting reaction. You're converting from light energy from the sun to chemical energy. And in this case, that's the ATP and NADPH. But because those are not super stable, you also need what we call the carbon fixing reaction. So that's your Kelvin cycle, or light independent reaction. And that's basically going to be responsible for carbon fixation. Which is basically making sugar. Which we're going to use for energy storing. So, big picture, right? So you have photosynthesis. You have carbon dioxide plus water in the presence of light yields glucose and oxygen. And we have cellular respiration. which is where you take glucose and oxygen. You get carbon dioxide, water, and ATP. Now, this results in this, and this is used for this. A couple of things to remember. So photosynthesis happens mostly in plants. Cellular respiration is going to happen in plants and animals and protists and fungus and bacteria. This happens in some bacteria and some protists too, just putting it out there. So plants are doing both. Don't forget that they have the ability to do cellular respiration and photosynthesis. So, another thing to kind of remember, kind of a trick, oftentimes you'll do experiments to see whether cellular respiration is going on or photosynthesis or both. If cellular respiration is occurring and there's nothing else going on, you would expect these things to decrease and these things to increase. So, if I have a container and it's closed, and there is an organism of some sort in there doing its thing, and you measure the gas levels, you're going to find CO2 levels increasing and O2 levels decreasing. If there's a plant in there, the plant is going to be able to supply some of the O2, and the animal will supply the CO2. The plant will also use its own CO2. So hopefully that was helpful. If you have any questions, just let me know. I'm happy to go over this in more detail.